Hey, Mike DeLeon on the road to recovery, way down here in Austin, Texas. And I'm so glad I get to share the story of Kristin Casey. She's an author and a consultant, and she wrote an incredible book called Rock Monster about her life with Joe Walsh. Yeah, the Joe Walsh. And heard some things from the book, heard some things that weren't in the book, and heard some things that really made me realize what an incredible, passionate story this is and how incredible her journey of recovery has been. On the road to recovery from Austin, Texas with Kristin Casey.
So my name is Kristin Casey, and I'm an author and a memoirist in Austin, Texas. And I wrote a book called Rock Monster, My Life with Joe Walsh.
Sex, drugs, and rock and roll. A stripper who dated rock legend Joe Walsh wrote a tell-all about the kinky time she shared with the musician and details what really went on in that world in the 70s.
It began when I started drinking at 15. I became a binge drinker the summer before my junior year in high school and all through the next 2 years of high school. And then I, at 17, moved to Austin for college. And, Austin had a big drug scene, and so I became addicted to speed within the first few months. When I was 18, I had spent all my scholarship money and grant money on drugs. I'd lost all my friends, so I quit drugs, but I continued to drink, and I got a job in a bar, so I was sort of enabled to drink. And after a couple years of working as a stripper in this club in Austin and drinking heavily, for the most part, I was starting to get my act together. I was back in school. I was not moderating my drinking, but tapering it back a little bit. And right around that time, I met Joe. He was in town to do a gig, and we hit it off. I actually kind of fell in love with him that night. It was a sort of a love at first sight, or 11, 20 minutes, voice in the head, skies parting, revelation of, oh, this is the man you're meant to marry. Within a couple of months of dating Joe and being on his schedule, I decided, I'd use a little coke just to sort of stay on the same schedule with him. I was so in love with him, and, we lived in different states, so I wanted to maximize our time together. And I had all these rationalizations, basically, for why I asked him if I could do a bump here and there. He doled out a little bit of coke here and there, and the next thing you know, I was slowly but surely becoming a full-blown addict. He'd fly me out to wherever he was for a couple of weeks, and I'd go home for a couple of weeks, or I'd see him every other week. Eventually it got to the point where I thought, I need to do something with my life. I was 23 or so, I guess. And I said, I either need to go back to school or move in with you. And he thought about it for a couple of days. And then he said, yeah, move in. Let's buy you a house. Let's buy us a house. So he got us this beautiful home in Studio City, California. And I moved in with him. And from that point on, this was spring of 91, I didn't have to work. And now that I lived with him 24/7, the coke was around all the time. I'd basically have a 2 or 3 day binge every week, and then a couple days of recuperation, and then a couple days of him moderating my use, and then another 2 or 3 day binge. In fact, that's where the name of the book came from, Rock Monster. It's a play on words because Joe was a rock star. And the term monster was actually our pet name for each other, and what it meant was somebody who just had gone over the top with drugs, like a really hardcore partier.
In her book, she talks about sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Basically, she says they did a lot of drugs, tons of cocaine, that he was a functioning or not so functioning alcoholic. She also talks about what he liked sexually, a lot of BDSM. She says that they had sex with everything and everyone, but lots of drugs, lots of drinking, lots of craziness.
The Rock Monster title actually is, sort of partly applies to Joe as a rock star who is a, party monster, but also more to me because I was addicted to cracks. I just gave up all my hopes and dreams about being a writer and going to school, and I just thought it was easier to follow Joe around and have this identity of the rock star girlfriend, and that was going to be all I needed for the rest of my life. I felt eventually that without him I was nothing. And we were fighting all the time because we didn't know how else to communicate. We would hold it all in, and then we'd blow up at each other, and sometimes it would come to blows. And, we would make up because we loved each other and hated fighting, but we didn't resolve anything because we didn't know how to. We didn't have those skills. By the summer of '93, we ended up breaking up. About 6 months later, we actually got back together. That very night, his band, the Eagles, started calling and they convinced him to go to rehab and get back together with the band. And so we'd been back together for a matter of hours before he went to rehab. I continued to drink. And so over the course of that last year, we really just drifted apart. And then eventually one day it was over. In my delusional mind, I had no value and I had no purpose, and that the world would be better off if I just ended it, if I just killed myself. So I spent the next 2 years trying to drink myself to death, and I came that close. I lay in bed unable to move or talk. I was doing nothing but just, vomiting over and over bile, just vomiting bile all morning. And since I couldn't move or talk, all I could do was lay there and think, is this what I want? And I just realized something that I'd always known but had been in denial about, which was that this is not how I meant to go. When I was able to get up and around the next day, or a couple days later, I called this girl that I was working with at a strip club in Vegas who'd gotten sober 2 years earlier, and I asked her about these meetings that she had been going to, and she told me where to go, and for a while I was very convinced it wasn't going to work, but things did get better, and they continued to get better, and I never drank again, and I never used again. Life in recovery now is so much better than I ever would have believed had you told me. I thought life was just going to be boring and I would learn to tolerate it if I could find a purpose, and then I would just sort of, muddle through until the end. I was worried I was going to get fat. I was worried I was going to, socializing would be terribly awkward, that I would take forever to find any kind of work that I was halfway decent at. And, all my fears actually did come true. And, I did struggle with depression for most of my life before I got sober. I had it even as a child. And that did come roaring back early in sobriety. But I had a group of people who were there for me from day one. And they loved me, it's so corny, but they loved me until I could love myself. And it was genuine and it was authentic. And they never gave up on me. And, I just kept doing what I was being taught to do. And every time I took the actions I was told would probably help, things got better. And what that program of recovery did for me was establish very quickly a foundation of coping skills and a sense of community and a sense of self-worth and purpose. It was a process, and I would say the first 5 years of my recovery were challenging. They were difficult. And even when I'm in the middle of some horrible challenge that I think, how did I get here? I'm sober. This shouldn't be happening to me. I look back 6 months later and I realize, what a learning experience that was. I would never have learned that thing about relationships, or that thing about, dating, or that thing about family or boundaries or respect or self-respect, had I not gone through that.
Kristin, thank you so much for spending the time with us and sharing your story. Everyone should pick up a copy of Rock Monster, My Life with Joe Walsh, the story of Kristin Casey. What an incredible journey. And I appreciate her vulnerability and her sharing her story and her passion, because it's about sharing hope with other people. In the middle of America's worst addiction pandemic this country's ever seen, it's about coming together, people in recovery, sharing stories of hope with other people. From Austin, Texas, I'm Michael De Leon, and we will see you on the next episode of On the Road to Recovery.
Take a stand, you will start to see. You can lose some fear, and faith is near on the road to. Hold my hand, take a stand, you will start to see. You can lose the fear.
Michael DeLeon, the Recovery Army. Join the Recovery Army. I'll see you on the next episode of On the Road to Recovery. The Recovery Army coming to a city, to a state near you.